Assalamualaikum and good day, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present this review on range anxiety in passenger car travel. So this paper looks at range anxiety not only as a battery issue, but as a human factors and travel behavior issue. So in other words, even when battery technology improve, drivers still make a decision based on what they believe in is safely achievable. So in this presentation, I will briefly cover the problem, the review method, the major findings, and also finally the implication for design, infrastructure, driver educations, and also the future electric vehicles, EV, and internal combustion engine ICE comparative research. So to begin, this slide explains why range anxiety still matters. So the key point is that the problem is not limited to vehicle options. It also affects the way people actually travel. A driver who feel uncertain about remaining range may charge earlier than necessary, avoid certain roads, or keep a much larger, safer buffer than the trip objective required. So range anxiety is a behavioral. It shapes planning, road choice, timing, and confidence. The comparative angle is also important. Looking at EV and ICE drivers side by side help us distinguish which concerns are truly EV specifics and which are broader forms of travel risk management. So this review proposes a simple conceptual lens. I frame the issue around what I call travel assurance. Drivers are constantly appraising three things. First, energy sufficiency. Do I have enough usable energy to complete the trip? Second, uncertainty. Can weather, traffic, terrain, unfamiliar roads, or estimate error change the outcome? Third, coping resources. If something goes wrong, do I have credible options such as charges, information, skills, or time flexibility? So this lens is useful because it moves us beyond battery size alone. It shows that anxiety emerges when usable range, uncertainty, and coping resources are judged together, not separately. For methodologically, this study is a Prisma-aligned systemic literature review. So the review was designed to be transparent and reproducible, which also recognizing that the literature is heterogeneous. So the search covers multiple databases, including Scopus, Web of Science, TRID, IEEE Explore, and Google Scholars. Screening follows a conservative inclusion logic with attention to a passenger car relevance, behavioral outcomes, and methodological clarity. The synthesis then combined a configurative approach to map concepts and mechanisms with an aggregative approach to summarize directional findings where studies were comparables. So the method is a systematic but still realistic about the variation across the evidence base. The first major finding is that the perceived usable range is smaller than nominal range. Drivers do not act on the battery specification printed in the brochure. They act on what they believe remains after uncertainty and after their own safety buffer. So even if the vehicle says, for example, there is enough technical range, the driver may still behave cautiously if the road is unfamiliar, the charger is uncertain, or conditions may increase consumption. This is why the idea of buffering is important. It helps explain the gap between objective capability and subjective confidence. So in practice, anxiety rises when the destinations or a reachable charger no longer feel comfortably inside that usable range. So the second finding is more encouraging. Experience and knowledge are protective factors. So across the literature, a consistent pattern appears. Novice drivers tend to feel more uncertainty and keep larger safety buffers, while experienced drivers become better at interpreting the system and managing the trip confidently. So the paper also highlights a mastery pathway. When drivers gain experience, and especially when they successfully handle a low energy situation, they learn that coping is possible. This reduces the trade appraisal. Importantly, the review suggests that knowledge can partly substitute for experience. That's mean good onboarding, education, and practical guidance can reduce anxiety earlier, even before users accumulate long-term EV experience. So the third finding focus on the interface design. Drivers do not only react to the range estimate itself, they react to how stable, reliable, and actionable that estimate feels. One especially important insight from the literature is that the trade-off between the stability and also the volatility. A slightly biased estimate may still be manageable if it's behaved predictably, but an estimate that is more accurate on average yet fluctuates heavily can be psychologically worse because it disrupts planning and weakens trust. So this has a strong design implications. So EV interfaces should not only maximize technical accuracy, they should also support stable planning, communicate uncertainty clearly, and provide practical coping information such as reachable charges and realistic contingencies. The fourth finding is that a range anxiety becomes visible in behavior. So we can observe it in the way drivers charge, choose roads, and plan long distance trips. So EV drivers often charge opportunistically because it is strictly necessary. They may also select routes with more reliable charging options or keep larger buffers than objective distance would justify. During longer trips, this anxiety is dynamic rather than static. It changes as states of charge changes, as charger options appear or disappear, and as a delay costs become more important. So this is why the review argues that simple general survey items may miss parts of the real phenomenon. So the behavior itself is part of the evidence. So the fifth finding is that infrastructure reliability functions as a psychological interventions. So in other words, anxiety is reduced not simply by increasing the charger count, but by improving the driver's perceived coping capacity. So a network reduces anxiety when drivers believe it is dependable and available when needed. So the most important features are the charge uptime, coverage along high demand corridors, fast charging where delay penalties are highest, and also the transparent real-time informations. So this is a crucial policy message. Nominal network size alone is not enough. If if charges are unreliable, difficult to access, or poorly communicated, the psychological benefit remain limited even when the number of charges appears impressive on paper. So this slide highlights the main comparative gaps in the literature. EV and ICE are often discussed together but not often measured well in parallel. Many studies examine EV drivers alone and treat ICE as an implicit baseline. So others compare EV charging behavior with traditional refueling or compare consumers' perceptions against ICE expectations. But truly construct a parallel measurement is still rare. That matters because saying EV drivers are more anxious than ICE drivers is not methodologically robust unless the same underlying construct is measured equivalently in both groups. So the review therefore argues for better comparative instruments, parallel scenarios, and measurement invariance testing so that future EV and ICE comparisons are genuinely valid. Okay, so what does all this mean in practice? First, for design, interfaces should stabilize range guidance, communicate uncertainty clearly, and show reachable contingency options. So second, for onboarding and education, new EV users need structured support to learn realistic usable range, charging logic, and trip planning strategies. Third, for the infrastructure and policy, emphasis should be placed on reliability, corridor coverage, and information transparency rather than charger count alone. Finally, for research, this next step is to develop a comparative energy assurance framework with parallel EV and ICE measures. dynamic scenario-based tasks, and stronger longitudinal design. So in short, the issue is not only technological, it is a behavioral, informational, and socio-technical. So to conclude, the main takeaway is this: the challenge is not only battery range, but travel assurance. So range anxiety is a contextual, behavioral, and shaped by information and infrastructure, not just by capacity. So experience, trustworthy informations, and reliable charging system can reduce that anxiety substantially. So at the same time, the comparative evidence between EV and ICE drivers still need to become methodologically stronger. uh, I think thank you very much for your attention. I think that's all from me. Thank you.